Good afternoon, and welcome to Comport's Storage as a Service webinar. We're going to give it a few more minutes and let a few more people join before we get started. So just enjoy the Feel the Freedom to Innovate slide with our little jumping doggy.
This is actually the way Eric Krucker is going to look the first time he gets to go out and have a drink with customers again.
All right, I think we're ready to get started.
All right.
All right, so we have a great session for you today. Get ready to learn new approaches to old storage issues. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping topics. Please submit your questions in the chat box, and we will answer them at the end of our session during the Q&A portion. Also, everyone attending today's session will receive a $25 gift card from Amazon. We will be sending those out over the next 24 hours. Okay, so let's get started by introducing our presenters. David Garrity is Comport's as-a-service Director of Strategic Solutions. David is a visionary on delivering as-a-service solutions to our customers to make their environments more cost-effective, agile, and responsive. Joining David is Comport's CTO, Eric Krucker. Eric is responsible for Comport's IT solution strategies and roadmaps from both customer and partner perspectives. We'll be starting off with David first. So David, you're on.
Thank you, Susan. Again, first of all, thank you everyone for taking the time. As Susan mentioned, please feel free to utilize the chat function for any questions, comments, anything like that. Thanks, Eric, for joining me. What are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be talking about storage as a service, and we're going to start off with why storage is a good fit for an as-a-service model. And then Eric's going to jump in and talk about some of the nimble value proposition and some of the strengths of that technology and why it's so well suited for this type of a model. We're going to broaden the perspective a little bit and get into the foundations for as a service and some of the areas that Comport and our partnership with HPE allows us to have such a robust service offering in this space. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what else is out there in the market. This is a very fast growing area in the industry, everything from an on-prem and hybrid perspective, and talk a little bit about what else is out there. And then how do I get started? We want to be able to make this actionable and want to have some follow-up conversations with everybody who's on here to see how we can partner and help move your business forward. Why storage for as a service? We hear a lot about different aspects of an as a service model. SaaS, right? Software as a service. We hear about infrastructure as a service. BAS and DRAS for backup and DR. Storage is just a little different, but why is it such a good fit? First of all, storage continues to grow. Not very many people have a shrinking storage environment. Yes, sometimes things are moving to cloud. You got different things that can have that as an impact, but data is growing. As a result of that, it's very often over-provisioned. About 50% is what analysts say you typically have from an over-provisioning, I can talk, perspective. And one of the reasons is because the growth of data is so driven by business. The business demands make it hard to predict that. We have customers out there a lot of times in the, for example, security cameras. Okay, we're going to make a switch from standard definition to high definition cameras. That can cause an exponential growth in the storage requirements and how you manage that. And many of the storage vendors will say, well, we're going to store it in the cloud. That's so you don't have to worry about that. Verkada is one of the solutions that does cloud video storage. A couple months ago, they had a data breach, and there was data from over 150,000 security cameras around the world got exposed, and major security breach. So you sure you want to trust the cloud for that stuff? And to that point, location matters, where you're having this data. So we want to be able to offer this in as many different ways as possible in an as a service model, because it really solves for some of the key universal problems that we all face in IT. I already mentioned over provisioning. Sorry. I mentioned the over provisioning aspect of this. We have you tied up capital, the unknown growth. You don't want to run out of storage. So in those unknown ways, we end up with overbuying, over provisioning for the fear of the unknown. Time to value. Again, we want to make sure we're leveraging the IT assets that we deploy on the floor. The time to value is from a time that I order that equipment, when is my business actually using that? 133 days, as a study showed, is a typical time to value for IT assets. We want to be able to only put on the floor what's needed and reduce that time to value. And that's a critical aspect of getting the most out of the IT organization. And finally, management. An as a service model allows us to do the mundane, and we'll talk more about that, but some of that patching, firmware, etc., making sure that storage is secure. It's something that we specialize in, and make sure that we can provide that as part of the solution. So that's the why storage is such a good fit for an as a service model, and some of the things that we're going to be talking about getting more value out of it. Now, Eric, I'd like you to take us through a little bit of the value proposition of Nimble Storage, and why that's such a good fit, and why that plays into the storage as a service story.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, David. And just to add a little bit to what David was saying, is I don't know the last time I've talked to anybody and they said, yeah, we're going to be using less storage this year.
Exactly.
Everybody's using more storage. Data is exploding everywhere from every point, right, from the edge to the data center and beyond. So talk a little bit about Nimble and why it's important, and why we think Nimble's a good fit for storage as a service, right? The core and the real value of what Nimble is about is intelligence, right? So AI is pervasive everywhere now these days, and becoming part of everyday business, right? With intelligent processing and GPU offloading and things like that. And this is where Nimble has come in, and since the acquisition that HP made a few years ago, InfoSight is one of the biggest things that was the key to that technology, right? So everything needs to be taken into account in the stack, right? And it's a pretty big stack that needs to be taken into account from start to finish, and particularly when there's problems. And what we found is that 90% of problems arise above the storage layer. And as a storage admin, we're always dealing with, I was always dealing with latency, right? Things are slow. Everybody's always calling and telling me things are running slow. And a lot of times the problems were not with the storage layer, and that's shifted even further from where it was a few years ago, because now there's things like all flash and NVMe, and so storage isn't necessarily the bottleneck anymore. That's not where the problem lies. The problem usually lies above the storage. And so being able to pinpoint that and find that quickly and effectively is really where the key value to storage, I believe, is these days. And these things are becoming really very complex with VMware coming into place, and being able to pack a lot of VMs and a lot of compute power into a small footprint, layering a lot of apps on top of each other in a virtualized format, makes things very complex these days. And so that's where the AI and the analytics engine from HPE comes into place, and particularly around Nimble. That's called InfoSight. And InfoSight's gathering data from all across the world, HP's entire install base, right? Every single data point, there's tons and tons of instrumentation that's coming from the arrays themselves and other infrastructure that HP has in place around servers and networking, along with storage. So all this data is being conglomerated into one place, and there's a really powerful analytics engine called InfoSight that is harnessing all that data and doing things like creating wellness plans, right? I mentioned before, trying to finding the root cause of an issue and finding it quickly, because if you've been in the industry for any given amount of time, you know that trying to pinpoint such an issue in such a complex stack can take lots of time, and it's particularly when there's a downtime issue and your app owners are complaining to you that I can't run this app, or the business can't operate. You want to find those things quickly. And as I said before, with being able to consolidate a lot of VMs and a lot of applications into such a small footprint, causes noisy neighbors, and being able to pinpoint if there's a noisy neighbor that's causing your issue, or is it your particular VM, or is it your application, or is it the hardware? So HP's gathering information about the storage, about the applications, about the hardware, what's going on, trying to figure out, is there an issue, looking at situations and configurations across the world and trying to figure out, is there a problematic configuration someplace else that may affect you as a customer? So trying to optimize all that, trying to be proactive about all that is really what HP InfoSight is all about. So, being self-healing, predicting issues and resolving them ahead of time, being able to manage the storage in a really easy, simple manner, not having to care and feed for it every day, and optimizing that storage, again, is really what Nimble and InfoSight is all about. And as I said, like there's tons of telemetry coming from across the HPE stack, not just storage, but particularly where it was built around storage, there's a little bit more breadth of and deepness of the instrumentation that's coming from, and the telemetry that's coming from the storage stack. So it gives a tremendous amount of visibility into what's going on with not only the Nimble storage, trying to predict issues, but also from the VMs, gathering that information from vCenter, making it easy to consume and easy to read, and then making predictive recommendations to you, not waiting until there's a problem, is really what Nimble and InfoSight is striving for and is all about, and has been doing for a very long time. And again, applying that machine learning and those data analytics to all of that data, because it's not just having all that data, right? It's being able to apply machine learning and analytics to that data to add value to what that's doing. So as I said, Flash is basically everywhere these days. NVMe is moving everywhere into the data center. So speed is not really the issue right now as far as what we're dealing with in the storage realm. It's the complexity of the stack. It's being able to add value through that data that's being generated through the entire stack, being able to analyze it, being able to make recommendations, thoughtful recommendations, and when there are issues, trying to pinpoint that issue quickly and getting it resolved.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eric. I think in the context of what we're talking about with regards to storage as a service, all of this automation, all of this AI is really critical to being able to allow your teams to focus on the business. We partner with HPE to layer in that service and to be able to offer this in a consumption model that is in an as a service world. So as a foundation, we partner with HPE in the ability to deliver this technology in a as a service way. And it starts with storage. We're talking about data, but the bottom line is this is all done in the context of a way that technology is delivered. And that comes in from a vision of digital transformation. I really like this picture because the reality is, in the modern day of technology, what we're talking about, this digital transformation and journey to the cloud is happening, but it's happening at different speeds depending on the area of the business that you're talking about. Modern apps, analytics, AI, a lot of these things were built in the cloud. They were built in the cloud or built for the cloud. So they can get there. It's part of their ecosystem. But the bottom line is we also have traditional IT applications that have been around for a while, data heavy in certain cases. You have regulatory issues. And the journey to the cloud is much more challenging. But the business is experiencing things like public cloud. So they want that same type of experience for the traditional apps and data that struggle to get there. And that's what this allows us to do. Um, some of those challenges that really show themselves in this journey is application entanglement. This is a different perspective on it, but I was meeting with a customer yesterday and we were talking about the mainframe and talking about, yes, there's still a lot of companies running a lot of things on mainframes, and well, we're going to finally get rid of the mainframe. Well, this was a whole conversation around application entanglement. The mainframe has hooks into so many applications, and that it's a multi-year journey just to work through that application entanglement in terms of how many different applications, data sets does that mainframe inform and get information from. So that becomes such a big part of it when talking about getting data to the cloud or getting out of a certain business model. Data gravity. The location of data is so huge, especially when you're talking about AI, you're talking about data lakes, and the proximity of that data is so material. Obviously, security and compliance. We just talked about Verkada as an application of a security solution that had a breach, and all of those, the camera data was out there. Obviously, skills, culture, and resources. Those are all the things that make it hard and challenging to get to the cloud, and why it's important to be able to have a cloud-like experience on-prem. And that's really what we're going for. And as I said, storage is a great place to start, but it doesn't end there. Eric just mentioned, he talked about, all the layers on top of the storage that play into the overall environment. And in partnering with HPE, there's multiple configurations that have been optimized for containerization, for VMs, for storage, general compute, desktop. There's different ways that we can layer on top of that storage to complete the solution in a consumption model to be able to get to that faster time to value like we talked about, capacity when you need it, pay for only what you use, and finally freeing up IT resources. We're talking more and more to our customers who that last piece, freeing up IT resources to support strategic initiatives, is more and more material. And that's where our Comport Secure Management comes in. As a consulting and solution provider, one of the things that we're finding more and more is that people want to bring in, it used to be the consultants were brought in from the outside to provide layers of expertise, and internal IT departments kept the place running. Well, as technology changes, as the industry changes, frankly, as generations change and people are looking for more and different ways to enhance the work experience, IT organizations want their teams, businesses want their teams to be more at the forefront of transformation. And yes, we can help in those journeys, but they often want companies like Comport to be able to come in and help the business, help the IT organization run and support the transformation that the internal teams are doing. And we've built a management organization, a support organization that's focused on being an extension of your IT team to support your team in the transformation and the growth that you're looking for. And that's something that we take a lot of pride in being an extension of that organization, an extension of your team, part of your team, to be able to support that, and to be able to wrap that around all of our as a service offerings, starting with storage as a service, but also integrated into our backup as a service, DR as a service, infrastructure as a service, really the whole portfolio. And it starts with our management support structure. So when we talk about the as a service model, what we're doing is we're looking at the actual growth of an infrastructure. We're talking about the actual growth of an environment and the challenges associated with that. How do you handle that unknown growth? Well, option one is I just buy a bunch of crap. I'm going to buy what I need, regardless of what I'm going to use today. Well, in an as a service model like we're talking about today, the intent is to actually only pay for what you use, or pay for as close to what you use as possible. And what this model does is it says, I'm going to have this orange line represents the amount of capacity that I'm going to have on site to meet my needs. This lower line is simply what we call a reserve capacity. That says that's the floor. That's the floor of what I'm going to be paying for. But in actuality, I'm truly only going to be paying for this dotted green line, what I use. As a team, talk about the management layer that we're putting on top of this. We're going to be working with you over time to be able to say, hey, we're growing here. Look at this. We got a big spike coming. This point here, we need to add some capacity on the floor to make sure that you're positioned for that. Is this demand that's going to continue to grow? Is it something that's going to shrink down? So we want to work with you to be able to provide that capacity and utilize it for the needs that you have, and make sure that we're continually aligning the use of the storage, the use of the technology with the costs, so that you're not just going and doing what we talked about at the beginning and doing that over provisioning because of the fear of the unknown. And we're seeing this particular issue, the risk of over provisioning, as being a huge part of the value savings of doing a consumption model, because you can worry about what you have today, knowing that you have a solution for growth as the demand requires it. And one of the things that we've built over the last few years is a model that allows us to have simplified software licensing. Hardware only represents a certain amount of the solution. And because of our service provider relationships with some of our partners, we have the ability to have very specific consumption licensing. Dial up and dial down, no minimums, no annual commitments. And that is a key part to the overall portfolio, because like Eric said, it starts with storage, but you've got VMware sitting on top of it. You've got Microsoft sitting on top of it. You have data replication technologies like Veeam and Zerto and Cohesity, data protection with Commvault. And there's all these aspects that layer on top of that storage. It doesn't just stop with that. And that's why we've invested and built out these solutions and built out these partnerships to align those software licensing models with the consumption that we're offering on the hardware. And that's a very, very key component to the picture.
And one thing I'll add,
Yes.
David, is that we make this simple, right? So not having to track support contracts for things like Microsoft and VMware, and then also not having to track if I have an enterprise agreement, not having to make sure that I'm adhering to the enterprise agreement, not having to have huge outlays of cash up front. So we can allow you to consume those licenses as you go, and support is always up to date.
Exactly. Yeah, a couple weeks ago we were talking with a customer, and I liked the way he put it. they're like many customers are having an enterprise-wide cloud migration, and he talks about every year when he re-ups his VMware licensing, he basically renews his VMware licensing at the point in which his current utilization is. And on day 1 or day 2 of that year, he's wasting money because every day they're moving things to the cloud and they do an annual true up on their support. Well, in this world of consumption-based licensing, you're only paying for what you use. And that's something to really consider as part of that. And lastly, the other area where we have invested to be able to complement that is, yes, our own cloud, and being able to offer those extended services as part of the on-prem ecosystem that we put in place to be able to do things like tiering off archive copies, being able to offer multi-tenant infrastructure as a service to support growth. Again, another conversation we had just this week with a customer, they really wanted to be able to have the on-prem for many reasons for their infrastructure as a service. So we're giving them a on-prem infrastructure as a service, but they often have growth that is unexpected. So we're building up an infrastructure as a service, multi-tenant infrastructure as a service offering that we can spin up to simply buy time to get them to the point of the on-prem deployment. So it's that ability to not grow, not deploy ahead of growth, but deploy after growth, but have a solution to temporarily support during that growth. So it's really kind of putting things backwards and allowing, having a solution for that growth, but being able to kind of mix up the order that you would traditionally do things by having this flexibility. So there's a lot of different ways to work this into the mix. So HPE and Comport, we're not the only ones out there doing this. There's a lot of other organizations nipping at the heels. Those are the dogs, right? Playing off of that. And the bottom line is each one of these organizations, and by the way, it's not just coming from traditional storage vendors. You look at AWS and Outpost, you look at Azure Stack, there's others, but this idea of, I always thought it was funny when, cloud, everything's cloud, everything's cloud, everything's going to the cloud. Well, what are the cloud providers investing in? They're investing in on-prem solutions like Outposts, like Azure Stack.
Yep. And with as I mentioned earlier, with the analytics engine and the richness of telemetry that's coming from that stack, it makes it so much easier to deploy, to manage, to operate, to pinpoint issues, to troubleshoot. And these other vendors are starting to get there, starting to go that same direction. But HPE's got a 5-year head start in that whole process. And Nimble's been around for a very long time. And has been developing that InfoSight analytics engine for a very long time. So they got a head start from all these other vendors that are out there.
Absolutely. And another piece to that, Eric, is, no matter what you're talking about, there is a financial component to this. These are storage as a service is a capital intensive solution for someone. Yes, the intent is to move more to an AppEx model for the customer, but there's still a large amount of capital involved. And the importance of having a very mature financial organization like HPEFS in this case, the financial services arm, is vitally important to be able to offer that flexibility to be able to put that hardware on premises and to be able to offer it in an as a service model to customers.
Absolutely, and I think again the completeness of the portfolio from Aruba networking to servers and storage, which HP's got the best servers in the marketplace, down to the storage and Nimble, and it is really a great story. And again, the cross stack analytics that they can provide is next to none.
Great, thanks, Eric. So what are we talking about? Just to kind of put a bow on this, from a storage as a service perspective, we want to be able to provide best in class storage technology. That's number one. It has to be high quality. We want to be able to have customers pay only for what you use. That's the whole idea behind this. You want to be aligning the expenses that you pay with your needs. And that's what storage as a service allows you to do, fully managed. If we're putting equipment on there and it's still consuming the time and the mind share and the effort of your team, it doesn't free up your team to be able to innovate, to be able to drive the business forward. Um, the ability to have software licensing on top in a true consumption model. These are all things that we want to be able to offer, that we want to be able to put in place so that you can worry about your business, not your storage, not your infrastructure. That just needs to be there to be able to support the applications which support the business, which support your customers. So finally, how do we get started? We want to be able to work together with you to identify potential workloads. We can conduct a workload assessment where we look at what's being utilized, what are the growth paths, and how can we build out a right size optimized solution for you. And we can deliver a very customized proposal very easily. This is my contact information. We're going to be following up. Our team is going to be following up with everybody who's been on this call, in addition to, of course, providing a gift card. Try to set up some time where we can discuss this and see if we can find an appropriate workload that allows us to work together and to be able to, build out a storage as a service model that helps your team, that helps support the business. So with that, we're going to just pause just a minute and take a look and allow people to utilize the questions or chat. If there's any areas that people have questions, areas of clarification, I would ask Susan to moderate that for us, if that's okay.
Sure. I have the first question I have is, what are some examples of where you see storage as a service being utilized?
That's a great question. I'll give three that we're seeing. One is just general purpose. So that's typically in the small, medium-sized organizations where kind of the smaller organizations that are maybe have the general purpose where it's a kind of a comprehensive virtualized environment. That's one area that we see that. I actually mentioned early on the security footage. That's a hugely growing, fast-growing area. Is whether you're talking about hospitals, whether you're talking about manufacturing facilities. A lot of manufacturing facilities are now leveraging high-definition cameras for quality control. The amount of data that's driving is off the charts. And what used to happen in that space is there was just kind of cheap disk that kind of came with the security solution, the camera solution. And all of a sudden that's moving from security to IT, and this is a whole new IT problem. And they're having to look at an enterprise storage solution for something that wasn't viewed as enterprise to begin with. And then the third I'll say is a backup repository. That's something that more organizations are looking to offload, both on-prem and offsite. When you talk about the 3-2-1 backup retention policies, the ability to have that on-prem off of that's no longer an asset to the customer to be able to provide immutability, use different types of storage in an on-prem, and then have the replication go to a cloud like Comport Secure. So those are three areas that I would say. Eric, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I'll say that in general, right? So for storage as a service, just from a generalized perspective, not necessarily from a workloads perspective, is, customers looking to not spend $500,000 on day one, and use that capital to deploy it elsewhere within the organization. So I can accomplish, 3 or 4 different projects within my IT project scheme rather than spending $500,000 on one project with storage. And then from a little bit more specific use case is layering this in with their DR strategy and letting Comport Secure and Comport Secure manage that for you, so you don't have to pay for any assets up front. So you could have storage as a service on-prem, storage as a service in a DR data center, whether that's ours or yours, and consume that all, on a pay-as-you-go and pay-as-you-grow model. And then we manage that entire stack for you, and you don't have to worry about managing your DR strategy, managing your primary storage, or managing your secondary storage.
That's great. Thanks, Eric.
You're welcome.
Great. So the second question we have is, what if we need storage as a service, but Nimble isn't the right technology?
Sure. So, one of the reasons, as Eric was talking about, why Nimble, that was the second question we asked. And one of the reasons we like Nimble so much is that it is a highly flexible storage technology. It covers a lot of uses, mission critical, general purpose, things like that. But it's not all things to all people. And if I actually go back and talk about some of the ways that we've built out our offering, one of the things that we've done is, we have, you see Cohesity on there. We can offer, let's say you have some general purpose file, different aspects of storage that are important there, immutability, archive, backup archives, things like that. We can offer this same type of solution utilizing other technologies. Like I've just mentioned, Cohesity, our partnership with VMware allows us to offer vSAN in a consumption model, which can be a really nice solution. Nutanix, other partnerships, different areas. So we have a lot of different flexibility. We really like the Nimble technology. We think that it covers a lot of different use cases. But it 100% isn't always the answer, and that's why we have partnerships with people like Cohesity, people like VMware, people like Nutanix, other technologies to be able to have that flexibility. Eric, your perspective on that?
And we're an as a service organization, so we will be consultative with you to understand what your business needs are, understand what your technology needs are, and work with you on a solution that works best for you.
Great. Well, I think that wraps up the Q&A section of our webinar today. I'd like to thank everybody, including David and Eric, for presenting today. I'd like to thank everybody who attended the webinar. Hope you found it interesting and thought-provoking. And we'll be following up with you, like we said, with the Amazon gift card within the next 24 hours. And once again, thank you from Comport.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.